Good evening, everybody. My name is Charity Rouse. I'm the Director of Local History for Spartanburg County Public Libraries. It is my delight to welcome you to our first Monday genealogy program, where we talk about different topics within genealogy research and gathering of information. Tonight is special because I am reviewing some of what I did on my recent sabbatical in November. I had 3 weeks to travel and research, and I chose to trace the path of my grandfather, Warren Lawhorn, who was a World War II U.S. Army serviceman, and where he was in Europe. The map you see on the screen is a railroad map of Europe. Railroads are much more extensive there and more utilized than we have in the United States. We are recording this program, and it will be posted on the library's YouTube channel in the genealogy playlist. So if you have questions and you're live with us tonight on Zoom, you're welcome to put your questions in the chat. If you have other questions, you may email us at kroom@infodepot.org or spartanburglibraries.org, and there's a contact us link. So let's dive in to see what I discovered. Okay, and of course, there. So as I was preparing to travel, I had to do some pre-research, and I've been researching my grandfather's military service for quite a few years. Due to the fire at the Personnel Records Center in 1973, we didn't have as much to go on as some. So we were very fortunate that my grandfather made this scrapbook that is on the upper left. And as you can tell, it's somewhat falling apart. I have scanned it, and I am happy to share the scans of this scrapbook with any of the other relatives of Railroad Operating Battalion 722 families. Just ask me. Happy to. My grandfather, W.E. Lawhorn, Warren E. Lawhorn, is there on the right. You will notice he was not issued a gun. He was issued just a sidearm because he was a railroader. And that factors into what types of records I was able to find and what I could use and not use, and what was helpful. But I looked at his scrapbook. I looked at unit histories and other histories of units surrounding his, as well as morning reports. The scrapbook and histories, I am so fortunate to have this scrapbook. He also saved a press release and a railroad map and timetable. You will see some then and now photos from the scrapbook and a couple other publications, as well as things that I took on a trip to France in 1991, and this trip to France, Belgium, and Germany in 2024. The book Steel Rails to Victory by Ron Zeal has been a fantastic resource. My grandfather actually supplied a picture that was used in that publication, and talks about railroads across World War II. Starts before, looks at German Reich railroads, as well as what the situation was before the war got going, as well as what happened throughout the war in both the European and the Pacific arenas. So it's a great resource. There's also the saga of the 708th Railway Grand Division, and that found through a digital project of the Bangor, Maine Public Library. So as things are being digitized, you may find that even though you searched a couple of years ago for a unit history, that you may find the unit history now online if it was written. All the units were supposed to write a little history. Some are better than others. Some look like yearbooks. The Company C ones are a couple of guys wrote their recollections. And their memories may or may not have been as accurate as you might wish. And so there are a number of things. Okay, so a little bit of structure. There is the Military Railway Service, and this European structure that Granddaddy was under the Second Military Railway Service. And there's a Railway Grand Division that supervises the work of a number of railway operating battalions, as well as maintenance and track engineering. So Granddaddy, for part of the war, was under the 709, and part of the war was under the 708. And so this history, sometimes you get lucky and find things at levels of history that you don't think are necessarily likely, but you can find out a little bit more about the organization. I also looked at morning reports for this research, this trip, this program. And shout out to Footsteps researchers. I didn't travel to St. Louis to do this research. They pulled the morning reports for me. While it did cost, it was not as expensive as going to St. Louis and sitting down, or one of the other National Archives. These are on microfilm, so they're in a couple of locations. But going there myself, spending the time to pull months and months and months of these morning reports myself. Sometimes it's more economical to pay someone else to do the work. However, at the time I was doing the ordering, I decided to only order the 722nd, and that has left me with September through December of 1944, where Granddaddy was on temporary duty with some other battalions. And then at the very end of the war, from September to December 1945, that the 722nd was largely decommissioned, and the remaining personnel were transferred to another unit. So I have the first two units on order. I need to order the end of the war as well. As I mentioned before, the Personnel Records Center in St. Louis had a fire in 1973, largely affecting Army and Army Air Corps records from 1914 to somewhere in the early 1950s. And so some survive, but some do not. Many do not. More survived than they initially thought because they were on loan to the VA or on someone's desk rather than where they were supposed to be filed. But 50 years on, they are still reconstructing those files. One issue with the morning reports that I will just say right up front, because this was a railway operating battalion, the unit was often covering hundreds of miles of railroad track, running trains and crews back and forth, delivering supplies and personnel. And the headquarters company that was doing the morning reports was not always in the close vicinity to the railroad operating battalion that allows more granular tracking. So just because they say they are in a particular place doesn't mean that's where Granddaddy actually was. So on to the fun stuff. The morning reports give a very high level of information. This is an example of the one from 10th August of 1944. While I have information about the training of the unit and that kind of thing, that is in a previous program from June of 2021 in our genealogy playlist. But these tell you at the unit level, the station or location at this point on 10th August 1944 was Camp Shanks in New York. And then it will say under the record of events, departed for permanent change of station on 11 August at 12:25 a.m. Military time uses 24-hour time, so 25 hours. And the destination is unknown. Mode of travel is rail. So that's the top half of the report. At the bottom half of the page, it tells you the battalion strength, the unit strength. So you get the number of command and officers and other various personnel, as well as enlisted men of various ranks. So I'm not going to show you the bottoms of a lot of the pages because they're not that interesting unless you are tracking on a statistical basis. So headed toward England and France in August of 1944. On the 23rd of August, we get the report that they disembarked at Liverpool at 1905, 23 August, and then trained for the marshalling area at 2015 on the 23rd of August. Granddaddy apparently got very seasick, but he never shows up as being sick on a day or being transferred to a hospital or anything like that. And he apparently towed the line because he was not like some of the others that you will occasionally see on the morning reports being demoted. He did get a promotion that we'll look at. So on the 23rd of August, they land in England at Liverpool, and they take the train, and they arrive on the 24th of August in Area C1 in Southampton, England, and they are preparing for overseas movement. On August 25th, there is no change other than of personnel, and they embarked at 1800, trying to remember, 6 o'clock p.m. from England. On the 26th of August, they arrive in France. Note it doesn't say where. It doesn't give any details. It does say by a steamer, so that's a clue. And then they marched 5 miles to the bivouac area. So wherever they landed was 5 miles from where they needed to be. So they had to march a little bit. I still do not know where the unit came in through. It's possible they came in over Utah Beach or through the port of Cherbourg. Both of those I know had rolling stock coming in, the railroad equipment, and it is likely that they were bringing the personnel in near the equipment, but maybe not. Still looking for those details. If you know anything about D-Day, D-Day came through the beaches of Normandy. Utah and Omaha beaches were the two primary beaches where Americans were. So, you know, they, I've got some more pictures in just a minute about how they would bring in the rolling stock, i.e. the railroad equipment. So on the 29th of August, they departed from the bivouac area at 8 a.m. Destination unknown, mode of travel rail. So now on the third, I'll get to that in a sec. Rival option, if they had rolling stock in their transport, Utah Beach was highly likely. Omaha Beach also had rail connections by mid-July. However, they got the rail connections for both Omaha and Utah beaches put in, and then they had a storm. And so Utah Beach fared better than Omaha Beach. So more likely Utah Beach. They had these transports that had rail tracks in them, and they had ways to match them up with kind of floating engineered rails as the tide came up and back. Very, very cool engineering. The picture on the right is of Omaha Beach. It was taken in 1991. Utah Beach, the beachhead itself looks very similar today. If they came in to Cherbourg, France, they would have lifted the rolling stock off of the transports by train and lowered them onto rail tracks there at the docks. The photo on the left is from Steel Rails to Victory, courtesy of the U.S. Army. The photo on the right was, I couldn't get close to the port because, well, there were fences and things. So that was my best shot at the main port, cargo port there in Cherbourg. Another helpful resource was the Memorial Museum of the Battle of Normandy in Bayeux, France. Bayeux is not far from Cherbourg. And they had a grand total of one panel in the entire museum about the railroad. Oh, well. It's a good panel. It shows some of the track building on the beaches. It shows some of how the various rolling stock came over, how the railroad developed. And they include a statement that says, as they could not be offloaded on the docks in Cherbourg Harbor, the first locomotives arrived on the beach at Omaha on 19th July on board a landing craft tank, equipped with a floating ramp and cranes. The reason they couldn't land at Cherbourg at that part was the harbor was still filled with landmines and random material that the Germans left to booby trap the port. At the end of July, 2 sea trains, ships modified for transportation of railway gear, tied up at the Lahommet Harbor Wall, where they offloaded steam and diesel engines. By 15th September of 1944, the Americans had offloaded around 500 locomotives at Cherbourg, and by April 1945, over 1,400. So we were taking not only our personnel, but our equipment over. The railroad battalions were sponsored by various rail companies here in the United States. The 722nd was sponsored by the Seaboard Airline Railway. No air transportation. It was just airline, as they were fast. And they ran right here through Spartanburg. So the other thing you can find in the morning reports are casualties, transfers to hospitals, transfers to other units, that kind of thing. On the 31st of August, they were still en route, but they had a casualty. James May was a non-battle casualty in the line of duty, investigation not required, died at 16:30, 31 August 1944. The casualty occurred near Fleur, France. And I have a sneaking suspicion it's F-L-E-R-S France, not F-L-E-U-R-S France. Just because of location, and with the U, it's a flower. And I don't think there's a place named for that. I did a little bit of additional research on James May just to find out whether he was buried in one of the cemeteries in France, but no, his body was returned to the United States and he has a headstone. He's buried in Alabama. Don't know why, haven't done more research than this, but it can give you some clues as to other places to look for your person if they happen to be mentioned individually in the morning reports. So on the 1st of September, 1944, they are at Le Mans Station. The record of events, they arrived there at 10 a.m. So I had, in 1991, visited Le Mans, France. I didn't know Granddaddy had been there. I didn't take a picture of the train station. Sorry about that. I'm sorry about that. But I do have a picture of the back of the cathedral with all of the flying buttresses and a picture of what Le Mans is more well known for, racing. I brought my brother a race car back from France in photo form, of course. So the next information we have is a listing that on or about September 7th or 8th, Granddaddy and many others, it's 128 enlisted men, were sent to temporary duty in Cherbourg, France, with the 729th Railroad Operating Battalion and also the 720th Railroad Operating Battalion. So back to Cherbourg for just a minute. That was my first main stop. I flew into Paris and then I took the train down to Cherbourg, France. In Steel Rails to Victory, we have a picture of the roundhouse, which is in the main storage yard and freight yard. It's how they rotate engines from one line to another. It's a big turntable. It's really cool to see one of these operating. And from the picture I took of the port, I turned around and put my camera slightly through the fence and took this picture. It's a very bad picture because I'm short. I couldn't get height to see it, but this is a roundhouse, a turntable at this company. And then the tracks crossed the road between there and the port, major highway. So I don't know, it's probably not the same roundhouse. It's probably not the same turntable. Yeah, I found a turntable in Cherbourg. It was just kind of cool. Because I was there in November, I also was in Cherbourg for Armistice Day 2024. The 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month is when Veterans Day, Armistice Day is celebrated. Front desk at my hotel didn't know if, where. So yeah, about 11:15, I started wandering toward the train station, etc. A number of the people in this picture were honored with major awards. Don't ask me what they were. My French is not that good, and nor was their sound system all that great. But lots of ceremony and saluting and etc. was happening. How I found it was the band started warming up at about 10 till 11. And I'm like, okay, band, and I see some people. Oh, look, there's some people in uniform. Let's follow them. So I did. And that's how I found the park. There were World War I reenactors there, among other people in other types of uniforms. And this is the memorial itself. It is a memorial to those from Cherbourg lost between 1914 and 1946, both military and civilian, if I read it correctly. And those are wreaths that were placed in honor of various constituencies. And then because this is the 80th anniversary of D-Day in 2024, and the war and the American and other involvement in the war between 1944 and 45, they had a special little paper poppy that I was able to purchase from the Women's Auxiliary. And it does recognize the French, the Belgians, the British, Americans, and Canadians who were all active in the Cherbourg region. Between September and December, I don't know where Granddaddy was if he wasn't in Cherbourg. So I'm waiting for the morning reports from the 720th and 729th Railway Operating Battalions, to which my grandfather was loaned out on detached duty. However, his scrapbook does also show photos of Marseille, France, So he could have been in Marseille at this time period, or that could have been during the end of the war time period. I don't know. So more research. In December, on December 6th, 1944, there is a notice. You can see at this point, they've got people going back and forth to the hospital and sick leave and various things. And we've got a note that 123 enlisted men from temporary duty at Cherbourg, France, to duty as per roster attached. So they loaned out 128, they got back 123. I haven't seen any corrections that is a typo. So in those other morning reports, I will find out what happened to those other personnel. But the headquarters of the unit has now been moved from Le Mans and somewhere else to Erlequin, Belgium. This is in the Ardennes. It is on the Franco-Belgian border. And this is just to the east and on the south-ish side there of where the Battle of the Bulge is going to be happening starting 10 days later, 16 December to 25 January 1945. So their unit was providing the crew and the trains to transport supplies, personnel, hospital trains back from the front, etc., back and forth, supplying the Battle of the Bulge. Granddaddy was promoted to private first class on January 1, 1945. And there his name is in the list, about 10 from the bottom. So, woohoo! Granddaddy didn't have a lot of ambition to go further than private first class. He had, besides family, two major things that he enjoyed. Running trains. He just loved railroads, and baseball. And so he wasn't going to try to move up in rank particularly hard, because he got to ride trains. On the 18th of January, Battle of the Bulge is still happening. That was going on until the 25th of January. His unit was sent from, or he is on a list of 62 enlisted men that departed for duty at Namur, Belgium. He is on that list, trust me. And Namur, Belgium is not far from Erlequins. And major railroad point, again, still at the support side of the Battle of the Bulge, among other fighting. In Granddaddy's scrapbook, we do have a page that is basically friends in Belgium. My mother vaguely remembers that he may have stayed with a family during his time in Belgium rather than in a barracks. But I'm still looking for anything that I can verify on that. But the petite fille, little girl, Belgian girl, Marie Therese, would have been just a little bit older than my mother was at that time. So he may have just gravitated toward neighbors or a little girl on the street. But more to find, and I was not successful in Belgium at being in the right place for archives or finding the right person to talk to at a library or other spot to find out more. So it's still out there, and we hope that we can eventually find out more about these families. This little girl, the couple in the middle, and the lady on the upper left. So in Namur, Belgium, there is a citadel. They've been under 5 different military reigns over their time. Dutch, French, Dutch again, Spanish, I believe, and then Belgian. I got to take a tour walking through various of the levels of the underground of that citadel. It was very impressive, and I'm glad I'm no taller than I am. Some of the tunnels were pretty short. It is at the fork of the Sambre and Meuse rivers. And so a lot of river transport and canal transport is happening, and transfer back and forth with train. The morning reports sometimes got a little frustrating because in the records of events for 1 to 10 March 1945, and this is just an example, this happens many times through the months of morning reports that I looked at, usual duties operating railroad. Okay, I'm glad everybody knows what that means. And then they headed on into Germany. As I said, they are transportation supply, and they are working their way behind the Patton's army as they are working their way across Europe. April and May 1945, they were stationed in a couple of spots in Germany. As of April 18th, they were en route. Destination unknown, travel by rail, morale excellent, and they entered Germany. On the 20th of May, they've been in Warburg, Germany for a bit, and they are now leaving Warburg, Germany, and destination again is unknown by rail. So the irony of them hauling rail crews as passengers on the rails, but that's what was happening. They may have even been on a train crewed by their own personnel. 25th of May, just a unit strength, present for duty, 173 or 74. These morning reports, various times, they correct themselves 3 or 4 times, so you're not always positive which one is exactly accurate. And then they arrived on the 31st of May at Bremerhaven. At least the headquarters unit did. So we'll talk about Bremerhaven and Bremen. Morale is always excellent. I wonder at that confidence. But anyway, so while they were in Warburg, Germany, Granddaddy kept this railroad timetable and talks about best practices. It talks about where single track, where switches, where it was a dual track or a roundhouse or various things for lines in Germany. And the timetable was supposed to be active on the 26th of April, 1945. Granddaddy signed his name, Lawhorn, on the top of it and wrote, "Just a souvenir." I wish he was still alive to ask. But it did tell you where some of these lines were going. This is only a couple of the pages. There are 7 or 8 pages in this. And it tells, approximate times and that they want to run the train in a very timely manner. And then there is a map of where the unit was active. And you see Warburg there, just below center, just to the right. So I don't know where Granddaddy was along these lines and where he was stationed. Usually it was, I want to say about 72 miles of track that a particular unit would be doing. And they would basically crew a train from point A to point B, turn it over, send it on, point B to point C, and then hop on the train going back the direction that they came from. And so they were working one or both ways out of a particular place where they were lodging. While they were in Bremerhaven, the first scheduled passenger train, first scheduled train called the Seaboard Express, was going Bremerhaven to Hanover. This picture and a press release, which we'll see part of in just a moment. Granddaddy has labeled the Americans in the picture. So Lieutenant Barnett from the 722nd, these are on the left. Sergeant Mooney. Granddaddy is third from the left. Steve is their interpreter. I don't know Steve's last name. And then German Railroad employees. On the right, we have Captain Gregory, Captain Plant, and Captain Waltham of the 708th Railroad Grand Division. So as I said, that overarching in charge of multiple railroad operating battalions, they were under the 708. June 11, 1945, first run of the Seaboard Express from Bremerhaven to Hanover. And this is mentioned in the 708th history as well as some other places. I tried to find out more about any of the German employees, and that is going to be an inquiry, written email inquiry to the Deutsche Bahn archive, the German Railway Archive. The company has its own archive, and maybe they can help me out. I don't know. We'll see. Never hurts to ask the question. So this is part of the press release that on the June 11th, the 722nd Railway Operating Battalion inaugurated the operation of passenger train from Bremerhaven to Hanover, Germany, appropriately named the Seaboard Express. The Seaboard Airline Railroad sponsored the battalion, and the battalion is the first and only military railway service operating battalion to handle railway operations at a German seaport. So 722nd was running freight in and out of the Bremerhaven port. And they are using the train for transportation of military personnel and mail courier services. It will operate on a fast schedule from Bremerhaven to Hanover. And the Seaboard Express is manned by German crew under the supervision of a GI conductor. Additional passenger service will be established as the need is thereafter is required. So in the initial phases of railroad transportation, they crewed the American military transportation trains with GI crews, full GI crew. All the positions, the conductor, the fireman, the brakeman, everybody, the engineer, were American GIs. When they went to phase 2, they did hybrid crews that were part native, whatever the country is, French, Belgium, or German crews, and part GI crews that worked together. And then phase 3, they were turning things over to the native crews, in this case, the German crews, with supervision from an American GI. And so Granddaddy was one of those American GIs supervising the German crews. So this picture, unfortunately, I don't have a copy in Granddaddy's scrapbook because this was submitted for use in the book Steel Rails to Victory and submitted by Granddaddy. But this is the engine that they used. And some pictures have the sign on the front of the engine. This is in Bremerhaven. And Granddaddy is the second from the right in this crew. And you can see it's a mixed mixed crew with some Americans, some Germans in the picture. So how do I know that that was the Bremerhaven train station? Well, the Stadtarchiv Bremerhaven was kind enough, and Leah, their staff member, shout out to Leah, that they had some photos in their archive. And luckily, Leah had just digitized these and was able to send them to me. This is soon after the station was built. This particular version of the station was built in 1915. The Bremerhaven Gestemünde. Gestemünde was a previous name for a portion of what became Bremerhaven. So a smaller area, think about it as if previous little town that got subsumed as a neighborhood into the larger Bremerhaven. And Bremerhaven is technically part of Bremen, even though they are quite distant from each other, just by a lot of political maneuvering over time. There are entire histories of that. But this is the Bahnhof, the railroad station. And you see the front building is the terminal, the offices, waiting rooms, all of that. The back area is where the tracks are. And then this is another picture in that same time frame, approximately a couple years later, between 1914 and 1918, from the end. And so you can see the end of the covers over the rail area. In Granddaddy's scrapbook, I had this picture on the left, labeled Bremerhaven. And the engine on the front of the engine, it has BR on one side and Leahy on the other, Lehe. Leahy is another one of those little towns that's now part of Bremerhaven. I did stop at the Leahy train station to see if maybe that was that train station. It was not. That's just a platform. But the photo on the right is from the Stadtarchiv Bremerhaven, and it was taken in 1968. And you can see the similarity in the buildings, although that particular building over the rails no longer exists. Some other pictures Granddaddy took in Bremerhaven in 1945. You see the view of the docks, 25 feet from the track the caboose is on. So they were waiting for a load and spending time in the caboose looking out while things were loaded so that they could crew the train. On the right-hand side is one of the dry docks there in Bremerhaven. And that may be the Europa in the background to the left. I'm not sure. But when I was in Bremerhaven, my hotel was just too far to walk to the old harbor and just too far to walk to the fish market area, both of which I might have some pictures with stuff in the background of. This would have been in the old harbor, not the new harbor, because new harbor doesn't accommodate boats this big. So, you do what you can. And it was kind of like today's weather. It was a couple degrees above freezing and rainy, and it was just kind of miserable and gray. And I was about 2 weeks into my trip at this point, and I was tired. So, I decided to take care of me and not go to the old harbor. Went to the archive instead. So, this is what the main train station building looks like now. And the photo on the left is from the front of the Bahnhof, Hauptbahnhof, which is main train station. And the photo on the right is from the back side, where the passenger tracks, where you get on and off the train. So obviously it looks very different now. When the headquarters was in Bremerhaven, My grandfather's crew was running out of Bremen, and I'll tell you why I know this. This is the Hauptbahnhof in Bremen, main train station there in Bremen. The packing crates, boxes, containers are full of things ready to be set up for a Christmas market there in front of the train station. Well, Granddaddy had a lot of pictures of Bremen. And so this one is the Red Cross building in Bremen. And I was showing a couple of pictures around to the folks at my hotel. And shout out to the front desks folks at both the hotel in Bremerhaven and in Bremen for pointing me to the tourist information office as well as the archive. This is, again, the Red Cross building in Bremen. Showed it to the lady at the tourist information center, and she said, oh, that's just around the corner. That's Die Glock. It's the main concert hall. And yes, it was used in World War II for the Red Cross. Shortly after I snapped this picture of the modern Die Glock, what pulled up but a German Red Cross truck. So I just thought it was fitting and just, yep, you're in the right place kind of moment. So one of the other Bremen pictures was this picture of the front view of barracks at Bremen, Handel and Morgan, two of the guys Granddaddy was buddies with, and then a couple other neighbors on the street, gentlemen on the bike. Man, you can get run over by bikes when you're walking. Just be careful over there. And the lady on the left. Pretty distinctive architecture. And but it was not immediately identifiable. But the kind lady at Tourist Information wasn't able to get her name. But shout out to her. She recommended wishing on the Bremen Town Musician statue, which I did, tourist that I was. But also she was like, you know, that architecture looks like some architecture I've seen in a historic neighborhood near the train station. And she pulled out my map and she showed me train station, park, this neighborhood. And, you know, told me about how far it was, that kind of thing. And said, maybe you want to wander there. Make sure you stop by the Bremen Town Musicians first. So I did. Spent about 45 minutes wandering in that neighborhood. Was starting to lose light at about 4 o'clock, 4:15 p.m. And I decided I was getting a little further away from the train station and where I knew where I was than I was comfortable. So I was, and it was getting dark, although, I mean, it was a nice neighborhood and people were walking their dogs and coming home from work and all of that kind of thing. It wasn't that I felt unsafe. I just knew I needed to get back to the other side of the train station to my hotel and find some dinner. Not too late. I also needed to do laundry that night. But anyway, so I was like, okay, I'm going to turn right here and then I'm going to turn right again and head back toward the train station. That gets me headed back in the right direction. I turned and approached from the other direction of this angle because I wanted the angle to be closer to what was in Granddaddy's picture. And went, wait, I think that's the building. I think that's the building. Oh my goodness gracious. Was trying not to ugly cry in the street, trying to take pictures, but not be obvious, not look like I was casing the house, because this is a residential neighborhood. The buildings on either side, the modern multiple balconies to the left and the cement looking building to the right are not the same buildings that were there originally. In conversing with Marion at the Staatsarchiv Bremen, who was able to confirm that what is now 47 Park Alley was then 47 Franco Alley. And in the 1941-42 address books, they're versions of a city directory. And those are the last years during the war that they have the address books, and then they don't start back up until about 1948. But they were listed as an officer's hostel in 1942. So it is highly likely that this would have been used as a barracks building for these train crews. So that was just kind of cool. Worth wandering the neighborhood, worth not going to whatever museum was on the list for I could have done that day. As I said, Granddaddy enjoyed playing baseball. Part of the time in Bremen was after VE Day. And so they had a little bit more leisure than some other times while they were there. And these are some pictures of the guys playing baseball somewhere near the barracks, but I don't know where. These are all men who are featured in Granddaddy's scrapbook. Granddaddy was a catcher. He is there in that very dark picture on the left. But they enjoyed their baseball. So, mid-September 1945, a number of folks, probably half the unit, I'm guessing, were starting to be decommissioned, deactivated, sent home. And the other part of the unit were transferred over to the 759th Railroad Operating Battalion for the rest of the time there in Europe. And Granddaddy is on this list to be transferred to the 759th. Again, I'm going to need to order those morning reports. It's all time and money. So September, October, November, really, because his report of separation and honorable discharge was issued in December. They arrived back on 1st of December, 1945 to the United States. Or date of departure from Europe was the 1st of December. Date of arrival in the US was the 13th of December. And so Granddaddy was in northern France, the Ardennes, the Rhineland, and Central Europe. And he was brakeman on the railway. He had a ribbon about it with a rifle that he never carried. And so he had some other ribbons for the World War II Victory Ribbon, as well as the European, African, Middle Eastern ribbon for the areas that he served. And he was issued his lapel button. His highest ASR score was, it looks like 67 there. So some of the places that I visited in my trip in November: Cherbourg, Bayeux, Amiens, Kortrijk, Belgium. If you're into textiles, highly recommend. They have a museum about flax production. They are one of the top producers of flax and linen, or flax to be used in linen. Bruges, highly recommend Bruges. Chocolate Central. Also bobbin lace making. Fantastic. Namur, Belgium. Liège. Spent a day. Some of these I stopped for a day as a layover on the train. Nijmegen, Weser. There is a picture in Granddaddy's scrapbook of Nijmegen from the railroad tracks. Bremen, Bremerhaven, Germany. Hanover, Germany. Mannheim, Germany. which was just overnight. Some of these I was having trouble seeing any of Hanover and Mannheim in particular. I had trouble seeing any of the historic sites because the Christmas markets were being constructed and things were closed and it was a little dangerous to be in the construction zone. And then I traveled down to Hamburg in the Saar, visited with a friend there whose husband is in the Air Force, and Paris, France, and visited with two friends there. In 1991, where some of these pictures, this is a picture of the Musée d'Orsay, which is in one of the now defunct Paris train stations that I'm sure Granddaddy was through at some point. I was in Strasbourg, Le Mans, Utah and Omaha beaches in Normandy, Rouen, Saint-Malo, Mont-Saint-Michel, and Paris. And so a lot of different places. I didn't feel that I needed to go back to Utah and Omaha beaches this trip because I had been there 30 whatever years ago. Some notable sites. The British Cemetery in Bayeux, France is well worth a short visit. It's near the World War II Museum, the Museum of the Battle of Normandy. It's a little bit different than the American cemetery. And I forgot to pull one of those pictures for you all. Sorry about that. The American cemetery, you had the choice of headstone of a cross or a Star of David. That's it. Much more diversity, and plantings are unique around the various stones in the cemetery. In the Bayeux train station, and this is representative of many other places and public, they had a lot of publicly put up panels, interpretive panels about World War II. It was the 80th anniversary of D-Day. Particularly in Normandy, this was big. I'm sure their tourism people had something to do with it because they knew a lot of folks from the Allied countries were coming in to celebrate that bigger anniversary. But many displays, and I learned that my reading of French is a whole lot better than my speaking or hearing of French. In the Lille train station, nice historic train station, they had some public art out in the passenger rail area. So that was kind of cool. Liège, Belgium. You know you're in for a treat of a train station when it's like number 2 on the list of top things to see in Liège. I spent a beautiful Sunday in Liège. Not much was open on Sundays, but I was able to wander and see and see some historic markers and various things. But this train station is absolutely fantastic. So, very unique. Not the original one that would have been there when Granddaddy went through. Mainz, Germany. I tried to take some pictures, but it was after 6 p.m. and pitch dark, and the train didn't stop. And so all I have is a dark blur of the train station there. But these are some pictures of cranes moving debris from damaged railroad bridge on the Rhine River at Mainz. So those are, you know, I was there. I tried. The Bremerhaven Harbor. This is the new harbor. And so smaller, more pleasure boats, that kind of thing. As I said, I did not make it over to the old harbor where Granddaddy would have been. And then this is a model at the Historisches Museum Bremerhaven, which is the local town history museum. And this is about a third of it, and it diagrams out that Gestemünde portion of what became Bremerhaven, and in the celebration of, Wesermund, in the 100 years since that actually became a thing. And so, but this shows some of the where the placement of buildings would have been 100 years ago. One of the things I did learn, I knew from experience, but I tried really hard to live by it, is to travel light. I took a small European size carry-on, and Air France will weigh that sucker. This was 9 kilos. It was 11 coming back. I knew I was checking it on the way back. They made me check it on the way over because they said my backpack was also 9 kilos. I don't believe them on the backpack, but anyway. And then on the way back, I did also have a tote bag gift from the library in near my friend Muriel's house in Paris. And it, if you can't really see it, but it's a pig, a screen print of a pig reading by the fire, and it's shh, Julie, shh, I'm reading. So, a gift from her library to the librarian. I was in a lot of different types of transport. I think I've got all of them. A private car, my own, and then my friend Muriel's, airplane, train, many trains of all sorts of levels and types, cable car and Namur to get up to the Citadel, bus. They bussed us from Bremerhaven to Bremen because they were working on the rails at that particular point. So yeah. Also, I was also in a private car with my friend Mandy. Bus, taxi, metro in Paris, tram in Mannheim, and also a tram in Paris, as well as a boat. We took a canal cruise in Paris. So some special thanks, and then I will get to questions. I did see a few questions and comments pop up. Spartanburg County Public Libraries, my appreciations. Every 5 years, I am able to take a 3-week sabbatical. So this was a lot of fun. Footsteps Researchers, footstepsresearchers.com. They pulled the morning reports for me. They do also have tour guides that you can book over in both Normandy and at the Battle of the Bulge. For one person, it was a little out of my reach to fund that. If I had had a group of family, hiring one of their tour guides probably would have been really beneficial. We could have gotten to more of the places that were more than a walk from the train station. The kind lady at the Bremen Tourist Information Office, yes, helped me find that barracks. I will be forever grateful. Marion at the Stadtarchiv in Bremen, Germany. I spelled that wrong, Staatsarchiv in Bremen, Germany. Leah at the Stadtarchiv in Bremerhaven, Germany. Mandy in Hamburg Star, Germany. Muriel, Yasser, and Brooke in Paris, France. And then there were all the fellow travelers on trains where changes happened and no announcements were made in English or French, and they helped me get where I needed to be. Smile, be polite, and try to speak one of the languages, and people will generally help you out. Thanks for coming. Contact us at the library if you have further questions, but I know I did see some questions.
Yes, you did. There's quite a few.
Okay.
We're going to start. Can you scroll back in the chat and see Susie Wickman?
Let's see. I am scrolling back.
Right under the
Susie
one.
Wickman. Yes.
Okay. It's about the railroads.
Yes. Were railroads federalized during that period? How is the military working on railroads? So the railroads, not sure if you're saying US, which have never been federalized, in Europe, yes. So it was the SNCF, French Railroad, the Belgian Railroad, and then Deutsche Bahn, the German Railroad. And so they were working with those various companies. Now, there were probably smaller companies that were kind of networked under those. But yeah, they were working with the various railroad authorities in the various geographic locations. That's part of what those, the Military Railroad Service, which is the big overarching people, and part of what the 708, the 709, military railroad grand divisions, they were taking care of some of the negotiation and communication on the corporate level. And then the morning reports, footsteps researchers pulled the morning reports for me. You can order them from NARA, but it will take a whole lot longer. And I don't know. It would, what Footsteps charges for the morning reports is $25 per month per company. So I was just ordering Company C because I knew that Company C is the operating battalion, as opposed to the Company A and B, where one was dealing with the racks, the tracks and the roundhouses and that kind of stuff. The other was dealing with, so we have an engine that needs repaired. So we're working with captured rolling stock. We're going to put that back into service for the Company C to run it. And then there's a headquarters battalion that's doing the paperwork for the various companies. Cool.
And then Charity, if you keep scrolling, there's a lot of questions. Nancy Loy is next.
Yep. I don't know about morning reports. I know the naval ship logs, which is the deck logs, which is their equivalent. Those are online on Fold 3. Largely, I don't know how complete it is, but I know they're being put on Fold 3. So it is likely that the morning reports are being digitized. It's just a crapshoot as to whether it's your unit that you're interested in and how long it's going to take. So, I mean, periodically I do a Google search for the 722nd and just see what comes up. And there are things that have come up. And I know that there are various reunion groups that happened for many years. My grandparents went to battalion reunions for the 722nd. I've been in contact with another grandchild, who's actually grandparents and then parents were running those reunions. My grandfather was the baby of his battalion at 21, because in order to be, have done the railroad training course to work on a railroad here in the US, you had to be 21 at the time. And so he had gone through the Norfolk and Western training course, which allowed him to enlist in a railroad battalion rather than being conscripted into the infantry. I
already posted that there were no
okay, yeah, no, there's no handout for this one. If you need specific contact information or addresses, please feel free to contact us at the library.
And then the questions just continue after that.
Yep. So, Karen was wondering about the demotions. Yep, they tracked who had gotten in trouble, who had gotten a promotion, if you messed up, that kind of thing. So, yeah, the demotions are fun. I am glad that my grandfather didn't appear in them, that he kept his nose clean and didn't get sick. But it is kind of interesting. It would be fun to look at some of those other people and see what they did to get demoted, or injured, or various things. Morning reports for World War I would say there probably are. I have not needed to look at those myself, but this type of record keeping is pretty typical. And I know in the Civil War, a lot of the cards that were made by clerks in the it's not the Civilian Conservation Corps. Cheryl, help me out. It's the other, the Works Progress Administration.
Oh,
a lot of those clerks were copying from these types of unit reports into these individual cards for the personnel and making personnel files. So I would assume in World War I, it was more similar to World War II than what they were doing in the Civil War. World War I records were also impacted, personnel records were also impacted by the fire in 1973. So it never hurts to reach out and look at the National Archives website to see what resources there might be.
And
The
then
recording will,
Cindy was asking about when and how you can access the recording.
so the recording, we will submit that to the library department over the YouTube page, and they usually get it up by afternoon of Tuesday. Sometimes it's Wednesday, depending on who's in or out of the office. So it should be up on Spartanburg Library's YouTube page in the genealogy playlist, but it'll also pop up as newest content. So yeah, feel free to share the recording with people. So the next question is, when did my grandfather die, and had I talked with him about his service? Yes, my grandfather died in 1990. I was 16. I was laboring under a couple of problems in getting him to talk about his service. He went to the reunions. He talked to the buddies who came by in their RVs and visited with them on the front porch as they were retiring. As I said, he was one of the youngest in the unit, and so they were all retiring before him. And he might have talked more with my brother or my oldest cousin, who's a guy, but I was the baby of the family and I was a girl. So while I was able to take his uniform jacket and steel rails to victory and hat and some things for show and tell a couple of different times, because I've always been interested in history. He didn't share a lot about his service with me. I was the baby and I was a girl. So,
So there are a lot of wonderful attagirls for you there. And then below those are a couple more questions.
okay. Yes, and the purpose of this program is just kind of show by example some things I did and places I went. I went with kind of low expectations of what I would find. And I'm glad I didn't have higher expectations. Namur, I completely was unable to connect up with a railroad museum that is somewhere in that area. I was dealing with winter hours. I was dealing with post-Helene hurricane, internet outage, power outage for a week, really messed up my planning for the trip. And so I did not make it to that railroad museum. I have a feeling that that might have been a key to getting some of the Belgian questions answered. That said, I thoroughly enjoyed visiting Namur. I thoroughly enjoyed visiting the Citadel, and the library was across the street. Well, one of the library locations was across the street from my hotel. And so part of it is just experiencing the location where you are, in addition to the research that you can do. But yeah, it's kind of interesting to see what resources there are, because so many times they tell us, oh, the personnel record is destroyed, you can't find anything. Well, you can find a lot. You just have to dig a little harder. It's not handed to you on a platter. So, oh, the railroads we were transporting. Yeah, we were transporting on the rails in Europe in cooperation with the European rail companies. Some of this had been worked out in World War I. World War I, the United States Military Railway Service realized that you can't just send random dude through boot camp, throw them on a train, and expect the trains to run. You have to have trained, qualified railway personnel to run the trains. It's easier to take people who know what they're doing on the railroad, send them through a boot camp, and then let them do their job. Okay, yeah, Lori, I didn't really address this. Why did the Army bring over locomotives and not just use the ones already in Europe? Were the trains and tracks all destroyed? So, yes, there were some engines left. In fact, some that they had shipped over in World War One. I mean, remember, we're getting into the war in Europe in really 42-ish is when we go into North Africa and up through Italy, start doing there. We're going into and into 1943. We're going into the primary part of Europe with D-Day in 44. The war's been going since 1938, 39. So there's a lot of destruction that's happened. A lot of resources have been used up. There's not the manufacturing facilities available to produce the rolling stock. Now, there are times in these various histories that you will see something along the lines of, we entered the roundhouse at name the place and discovered camouflaged 17 engines and loaded rail cars and things. Now, a lot of them were booby trapped, so they had to be very careful about dynamiting, etc., the various cars that had been booby trapped for them. But some of them, the American and other armies advanced faster than the Germans had thought they would, and so the Germans had to retreat and leave assets there. There is a picture in Steel Rails to Victory of a World War I locomotive that had a lot of damage, but they were still making it run on whatever cylinder was left in and shifting things in and around that particular roundhouse. So yeah, it was a mix of European built, American built from World War I and that had been purchased between the wars, and then also rolling stock that was being transported across the Atlantic because they needed a lot of rail cars. Because you load up a rail car and you send it on to its destination. Well, you've got to load the next load from the port and get it going too. And then a lot of empty cars were coming back from the front, but a lot of hospital trains and other prisoner of war trains and liberated folks from concentration camps were also being carried. Not in the best of hygienic situations in that case when they're loaded into box cars, but it gave them a shot. So yeah. So
All right, that was it.
awesome. Thanks
I think
everybody for joining us.
Yeah, I think everyone really enjoyed it.
So see you next month for how we can all crowdsource and help contribute information we have found in our own personal research to help the descendants of enslaved ancestors find their enslaved ancestors. Doesn't matter who you are and what side of the racial lines you might be on, you can still help. So looking forward to seeing you next month.
Good night.
Good night.